His body was on fire. I watched my husband thrash in our bed at 3 in the morning, his skin flushed red and raw, sweat beading across his forehead like guilty tears. He scratched at himself desperately, clawing at places I couldn't see in the darkness. His breathing came in short, panicked gasps. "What's wrong?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. He stumbled to the bathroom, nearly falling against the doorframe. Through the thin walls, I heard him running cold water, heard him cursing under his breath. When he came back to bed 20 minutes later, he was still shaking. I lay there in the dark, perfectly still, listening to him suffer. And for the first time in months, I smiled. You see, 3 days earlier, I had discovered something in my husband's office that shattered everything I thought I knew about our marriage. Something that made me realize the man sleeping next to me wasn't the man I married 15 years ago. He was a stranger wearing my husband's face. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. That discovery led me to do something I never thought I was capable of. Something cold. Something calculated. Something that would set off a chain of events neither of us could have predicted. I had found 3 condoms hidden in the bottom drawer of his desk. 3 unused condoms in bright, accusatory wrappers. My husband and I hadn't used protection in over a decade, not since before our daughter was born. The sight of them hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. But instead of confronting him, instead of screaming or crying or throwing them in his face, I did something else entirely. I took those condoms one by one, and I rubbed dried red pepper flakes into the latex. I rubbed them in deep, making sure every surface was coated with that burning spice. Then I put them back exactly where I found them. And I waited. The waiting was torture. For 3 days, I watched him come home each evening with his polished smile and sharp cologne, kissing our daughter's forehead, pouring himself a drink, scrolling through his phone like nothing was wrong. But I knew better now. I saw the way his eyes darted to his messages. I noticed how he suddenly started locking his office door. Now, as I listened to him whimper beside me, scratching at his burning skin, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. He called in sick to work the next morning, something he'd never done in all our years together. I watched him stumble around the kitchen, his hands shaking as he tried to button his shirt. His face was swollen and red, his movements careful and pained. "Must be some kind of allergic reaction," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. I nodded sympathetically, handing him his coffee with the same gentle smile I'd worn for years. "Maybe you should see a doctor." He practically ran out the door. As I watched his car disappear down our street, I felt a rush of satisfaction course through my veins. But even as I savored this small victory, I knew something else with crystal clarity. This was only the beginning. The pepper was just the appetizer. Because what I found in that desk drawer wasn't just evidence of betrayal. It was proof of something much worse. Something that would require more than burning latex to fix. My husband wasn't just cheating on me. He was planning something that would destroy everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed for. And as I stood there in my kitchen, watching the morning sun crawl across the tiles, the strategist in me began to wake up. The part of me he'd never respected. The part he'd never seen coming. And as I watched him stumble out the door that morning, barely able to walk straight, I knew this was only the beginning of his education about the woman he'd chosen to betray. Would you have done the same, or would you have stayed silent? Tell me in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed because what comes next will shock you even more than peppered condoms ever could. The first time I broke my own rule, my hands were shaking. For 12 years, I had never entered my husband's office without knocking. It was sacred ground, his personal sanctuary where he could breathe and think clearly. I respected that boundary like gospel, even when I desperately needed something from his desk, even when common sense told me it was ridiculous to treat one room in our own house like a museum. But that Tuesday evening, something pulled at me. Call it intuition. Call it desperation. Call it the quiet voice that every woman learns to trust when everything else starts falling apart. He was at his monthly poker game, wouldn't be home until midnight. Our daughter Emma was at her friend's house for a sleepover. The house felt empty and hollow, like a shell of the life we used to have. I found myself standing outside his office door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I turned the handle. The room smelled like his cologne and old paper. Everything was perfectly organized, just like him. His desk sat in the center like a throne, surrounded by filing cabinets and bookshelves that held awards from work and photos of us from better times. Times when his smile reached his eyes when he looked at me. I wasn't looking for anything specific. At least, that's what I told myself as I sat in his leather chair and opened the first drawer. Bank statements. Insurance papers. Nothing unusual. The second drawer held office supplies and old business cards. But the bottom drawer stuck. I had to yank it twice before it opened, and when it did, my world collapsed. There, nestled under a stack of neatly folded receipts like sleeping serpents, were 3 condoms. Bright blue packages that seemed to glow under his desk lamp. My vision blurred as I picked one up with trembling fingers. The expiration date was 2 years away. Fresh. Ready. My husband and I hadn't used condoms since before Emma was born 9 years ago. I'd had my tubes tied after a difficult pregnancy, and we'd both celebrated the freedom. These weren't for us. These were for someone else. Someone he was planning to see. Someone he was already seeing. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I actually gasped, doubling over in his chair as the reality crashed over me in waves. All those late nights at the office. All those business trips that seemed to multiply. All those times he'd come home and barely looked at me, going straight to shower like he was washing something off. I sat there holding that condom package, and something inside me cracked. Not broke. Cracked. Like ice before it shatters completely. That's when the cold part of me took over. The part that calculated grocery budgets and managed Emma's school schedule and remembered every birthday and anniversary he forgot. The part that had been quietly keeping our life together while he planned his exit. I walked to the kitchen and opened the spice cabinet. My hands were steady now, focused. I took out the jar of red pepper flakes, the kind we used on pizza. Back in his office, I opened each condom package carefully, so carefully that I could reseal them perfectly. One by one, I coated the latex with pepper. I rubbed it in deep, making sure every surface was covered. My movements were precise, methodical. This wasn't rage. This was surgery. When I finished, I repackaged each one exactly as I'd found it. The receipts went back on top, the drawer slid shut with a soft click. I turned off his desk lamp and walked out, closing the door behind me. Back in our bedroom, I sat on the edge of our bed and stared at my reflection in the dresser mirror. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized. Someone with secrets. Someone with plans. For the first time in months, I felt alive. I put everything back exactly where I found it. And then, I waited. Drop a fire emoji in the comments if you think he's about to get burned, because what happened next changed everything between us forever. The waiting was the worst kind of torture. 3 days stretched out like 3 years. I became a master of pretending, smiling when he walked through the door each evening, asking about his day like I actually cared about the answer. But inside, I was watching. Cataloging. Building a case I didn't even know I was building yet. Tuesday night, he came home from his poker game at 12:47 a.m. I pretended to be asleep, listening to him stumble around the bathroom, brush his teeth, slide into bed beside me. His body felt like a stranger's. Wednesday, he worked late. Again. Texted me at 6 p.m. saying he'd grab dinner out, don't wait up. I sat at our kitchen table with Emma, helping her with math homework, both of us eating leftover spaghetti in silence. She kept asking where Daddy was. I kept lying. Thursday, he was different. Restless. His phone buzzed constantly during dinner, and each time, he'd glance at it with this look. Hungry. Excited. Like a teenager with his first crush. Important client? I asked, cutting Emma's chicken into smaller pieces. Something like that, he said, not meeting my eyes. That night, after Emma was in bed, I watched him pace around the living room like a caged animal. He kept checking his watch, running his hands through his hair. Finally, around 9 p.m., he announced he had to run to the office. At 9 o'clock? Emergency project. You know how it is. I knew, all right. I knew exactly what kind of emergency required 3 condoms. Drive safe, I said, kissing his cheek. His skin felt cold. After his car pulled out of the driveway, I sat in the dark living room and imagined what was about to happen. Somewhere across town, in some hotel room or apartment I'd never seen, my husband was about to learn a very painful lesson about betrayal. The thought should have made me feel guilty. Should have made me pick up the phone and call him, warn him, stop what I'd set in motion. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and waited. He came home just after midnight, and I heard him before I saw him. The front door opened and closed with unusual care, like he was trying not to wake anyone. His footsteps on the stairs were slow, deliberate. When he slipped into our bedroom, I could see his silhouette in the hallway light. Something was wrong with the way he moved. Stiff. Careful. How was work? I whispered. Fine, he said quickly. Just tired. He went straight to the bathroom. The shower ran for 20 minutes. When he finally came to bed, he was wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt. In August. In our unair-conditioned bedroom. I lay there in the dark, listening to him toss and turn. Every few minutes, he'd shift positions, trying to get comfortable. I could hear him breathing through his teeth, like he was in pain but trying to hide it. Around 3 a.m., it got worse. Friday morning, he could barely walk. I found him in the kitchen, slumped over his coffee cup, his face flushed and sweaty. When he tried to stand up, he winced and grabbed the counter for support. Honey, are you okay? I asked, the perfect concerned wife. Just feeling a little under the weather, he muttered, not looking at me. Think I might have caught something. Maybe you should stay home today. For a man who'd never taken a sick day in 15 years of marriage, his answer shocked me. Yeah, maybe I should. He called his office from the kitchen phone, his voice strained and embarrassed. Food poisoning, he told his secretary. Probably be out all day. After he hung up, he shuffled back upstairs like an old man. I heard the shower running again. And again. I should have felt sorry for him. This was the man I'd loved, the father of my child, suffering because of something I'd done. But as I stood in our kitchen, listening to him groan upstairs, all I felt was a cold, hard satisfaction. He'd made his choice. Now he was living with the consequences. But even as I savored my small victory, something else was stirring inside me. A hunger for more. Because pepper burns fade. Pain heals. In a few days he'd be fine, and we'd be right back where we started. And that's when the strategist in me woke up. Have you ever waited for karma to catch up with someone who hurt you? Share your story in the comments, because what I discovered next made those condoms look like child's play. Watching him suffer was intoxicating. For 2 whole days, my husband moved through our house like a broken man. He couldn't sit down without wincing. He couldn't walk upstairs without gripping the banister. Every time he tried to act normal around Emma, I could see the strain in his face, the way he forced his smile when she asked him to play catch in the backyard. "Maybe tomorrow, sweetheart," he'd say, and she'd look confused because Daddy never said no to games. I played my part perfectly. The worried wife. Bringing him ice packs and pain relievers. Suggesting he see a doctor. Offering to call his work and explain he was still sick. "It's getting better," he kept insisting, though we both knew he was lying. Saturday morning, I found him standing in front of our bathroom mirror, examining himself with the kind of horror usually reserved for car accidents. His reflection caught mine in the glass, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Suspicion? No. Not yet. Just confusion. Fear. "This is the strangest reaction I've ever had," he mumbled. "Maybe you're allergic to something new," I suggested, handing him his coffee. "Something you ate? Somewhere you went?" The way his face went pale told me everything I needed to know. He was starting to connect dots he didn't want to connect. By Sunday, the physical symptoms were fading. The redness was going down. The swelling was manageable. He could walk normally again, sit in his favorite chair, laugh at Emma's jokes without pain shooting through him. And that's when the high of my small revenge started to fade. Because Monday morning, he was back to his old self. Showering with expensive soap. Spraying on cologne that costs more than my grocery budget. Humming while he got dressed for work. I watched him from our bed, and the cold truth hit me like a slap. Pepper burns heal. Pain fades. In a week, this would all be a weird memory, and he'd be back to sneaking around, lying to my face, planning whatever future he was building without me. The condoms in his drawer were probably already replaced. I'd won a battle, but I was losing the war. That's when something deeper woke up inside me. Something that had been sleeping for years under layers of housework and birthday parties and school pickups. The woman who used to balance budgets down to the penny. The woman who remembered every detail, caught every mistake, saw patterns where others saw chaos. The strategist. While Emma was at school and my husband was at work, probably meeting his mystery woman for lunch, I went back into his office. But this time, I wasn't looking for condoms or obvious evidence. I was looking for something more dangerous. The truth. I started with his computer. Password protected, of course, but my husband was predictable. Emma's birthday. Our anniversary. His mother's maiden name. Bingo. Third try. His email was a goldmine of things he thought I'd never see. Lunch meetings that weren't about clients. Hotel reservations for one night when he told me he was visiting his brother. Credit card statements for jewelry I'd never received. But it was the folder labeled legal documents that stopped my heart. Bank transfers. Small amounts, but steady. Money leaving our joint checking account and landing in a personal account I didn't know existed. Money that was supposed to be paying for Emma's piano lessons and our family vacation and the new roof we desperately needed. Then I found the draft paperwork. Documents with official letterheads and legal language that made my hands shake as I read them. Property transfers. Asset restructuring. Beneficiary changes. And at the bottom of the pile, printed but not yet signed, was something that made the room spin around me. A draft of his will. Updated 6 months ago. In it, my name was gone. Completely erased. The house we'd bought together, the life insurance policy I'd helped him choose, the retirement accounts we'd built for Emma's future. All of it now belonged to someone else. Someone whose name appeared in neat black letters where mine used to be. Someone named Rebecca. I sat in his chair, staring at that document, and felt something inside me die and be reborn in the same moment. This wasn't just about sex. This wasn't just about lies or betrayal or broken promises. This was about survival. My husband wasn't just cheating on me. He was erasing me. Systematically, legally, permanently removing me from the life I'd helped build. He was planning to leave me with nothing while he started over with Rebecca, whoever she was. The pepper had been child's play. A moment of petty revenge that satisfied my hurt feelings but changed nothing. This required something bigger. Something smarter. Something that would protect not just me, but Emma's future. That was my first taste of revenge, but it wouldn't be my last. Because sitting in that chair, holding proof of his betrayal, I realized something that would change everything. If you believe quiet women can be the most dangerous, hit that like button. Because what I did next would teach him that erasing a woman who refuses to disappear is the biggest mistake a man can make. The will was the moment everything changed. I sat there in his leather chair, holding that document with my name crossed out like I was already dead, and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not my heart breaking. That had happened weeks ago. This was something colder. Sharper. The sound of a woman realizing she's been fighting the wrong war. All this time, I'd been worried about some affair. Some middle-aged crisis that would burn itself out. But this wasn't about passion or loneliness or whatever lies cheaters tell themselves. This was business. Cold, calculated business. My husband was replacing me. The document was dated 6 months ago. 6 months. While I was packing Emma's lunch and doing his laundry and planning our family Christmas, he was sitting in some lawyer's office, signing papers that would erase me from existence. Rebecca Morrison. That's who was getting my life. Rebecca Morrison was now the beneficiary of the insurance policy I'd helped him choose. Rebecca Morrison was inheriting the house I'd painted and decorated and turned into a home. Rebecca Morrison was getting the retirement money I'd encouraged him to save. I'd never heard the name before in my life. My hands were shaking as I read through the bank transfers. $2,500 in January. $3,000 in February. $1,500 in March. Small enough amounts that I hadn't noticed them missing from our joint account, but big enough to add up to something significant. He'd been feeding money to her for months. Money that was supposed to pay for Emma's summer camp. Money that was supposed to fix our leaking roof. Money that was supposed to be ours. I printed everything. Every document, every email, every bank statement that proved what he'd been doing. The printer hummed quietly in the corner, spitting out page after page of evidence. Evidence of a betrayal so complete, so thorough, that it took my breath away. This wasn't just cheating. This was theft. Identity theft. Life theft. When the printing was done, I sat back in his chair and tried to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. This man, who kissed me goodbye every morning and asked about my day every evening, had spent months systematically destroying my future. While I worried about his health and happiness, he was planning my complete erasure. The pepper seemed pathetic now. Childish. Like bringing a water gun to a war. But as I sat there, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal, I felt something else growing inside me. Something that surprised me with its clarity and focus. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was hot and messy and unpredictable. This was something else entirely. This was strategy. This was war. And I was going to win. I gathered all the papers and locked them in the filing cabinet in our bedroom, the one he never looked in because it held my boring stuff. Tax returns from my old job. Insurance papers for my car. The deed to my grandmother's ring. Now it held the ammunition I needed to take my life back. Over the next week, I became a different person. Not outwardly. Outwardly, I was still the same wife and mother I'd always been. Making breakfast, driving Emma to school, asking my husband about his day like I actually cared about the answer. But inside, I was gathering intelligence. I found Rebecca's address in his email. An apartment complex across town, the kind with a pool and a gym and young professionals who drive expensive cars. I drove by one afternoon after dropping Emma at dance class. Third floor, corner unit. Her BMW was parked in the spot marked 247. She was younger than me. Of course she was. Maybe 35 to my 42. Blonde where I was brunette. Thin where I'd gotten soft. Everything I used to be before marriage and motherhood and 15 years of putting everyone else first. I didn't feel jealous though. I felt analytical. Clinical. Like a scientist studying a specimen. This was my replacement. This was the woman who was supposed to inherit my life while I disappeared into nothing. But here's what my husband didn't understand about me. What he'd never understood, even after all these years. I wasn't the soft, helpless woman he thought I was. I was the woman who managed our entire household on a tight budget. Who negotiated with insurance companies and school administrators and contractors. Who solved problems and made plans and followed through on every detail. I was the woman who never quit. And as I sat in my car outside Rebecca's apartment building, watching her water her plants on her balcony, I made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't cheating. He was replacing me. On paper. In life. In his will and his plans and his future. What would you do if you found your name missing from your partner's will? Because what I did next would make sure I'd never be erased again. I was drowning in my own house. 3 weeks after finding that will, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Every morning, I'd make coffee for a man who was planning to erase me. Every evening, I'd sit across from him at dinner, watching him text Rebecca while our daughter told us about her day. The weight of what I knew was crushing me, but I had no one to tell. Who do you call when your husband is legally stealing your life? Your mother? Your sister? Your best friend from college who lives 3 states away? How do you explain that the man everyone thinks is a good provider is actually a master thief in expensive suits? I tried to act normal, but Emma was starting to notice. "Mom, are you sick?" she asked one morning, finding me staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked hollow. Empty. Like someone had scooped out everything that used to be me. "Just tired, baby." "You're always tired now." Out of the mouths of babes. That afternoon, while Emma was at soccer practice, I sat in my car in the parking lot and finally broke down. Not the pretty crying you see in movies. The ugly, desperate kind that comes from somewhere so deep it feels like drowning from the inside. That's when Renee knocked on my window. I'd known Renee Morrison for 2 years, ever since she moved in next door with her teenage daughter. She was quiet, professional, always dressed like she had somewhere important to be. We'd exchanged pleasantries over the fence, borrowed cups of sugar, the usual neighbor stuff. But we weren't friends. Not really. "Hey," she said when I rolled down my window, my face still red and blotchy. "You okay?" Something about the way she asked made me crack completely. Maybe it was because she was almost a stranger, or maybe it was because I was so desperate for anyone, to see that I was disappearing. But I told her everything. Right there in the soccer field parking lot, with kids running drills in the background, I spilled 15 years of marriage to someone who barely knew me. The condoms. The pepper. The will. Rebecca. All of it. Renee listened without interrupting, her face getting darker with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Show me the documents," she said finally. "What?" "I'm a paralegal. Have been for 8 years. What you're describing isn't just adultery. It's financial fraud. And if he's moving assets without your knowledge, that's illegal." I stared at her. "Really? Really? Show me everything." An hour later, we were sitting at my kitchen table with copies of every document I'd printed. Renee spread them out like evidence at a crime scene, her trained eyes catching details I'd missed. "This bank transfer here," she said, pointing to a statement from March. He moved money from your joint account to his personal account 3 days before a major stock dividend. That's not coincidence. What does that mean? It means he timed it. He knew money was coming in and made sure it went to him alone. She flipped to another page. And this property transfer document? He's trying to move the house deed to his name only. If this goes through, you could lose your home even in a divorce. The room started spinning. Can he do that? Not if we stop him first. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. Hope. Tiny and fragile, but real. Renee became my lifeline. Over the next few days, she taught me things I never knew I needed to know. How to document financial fraud. How to trace hidden assets. How to build a case that would hold up in court. The key, she said, is proving intent. Anyone can make a mistake with money. But this pattern shows deliberate deception. We worked like spies. Meeting at coffee shops and library corners, spreading documents across tables like we were planning a heist. In a way, we were. We were stealing back my life. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal at home. Kissing my husband goodbye each morning, knowing he was planning to destroy me. Making dinner while he texted Rebecca from the living room. Tucking Emma into bed while wondering if we'd still have a home next Christmas. But Renee kept me focused. Emotion is the enemy of strategy, she'd say. Right now, he thinks you're clueless. That's your biggest advantage. Step by step, breadcrumb by breadcrumb, we built his undoing. Tag someone who's ever been your unexpected hero in the comments, because what Renee helped me discover next would change everything I thought I knew about justice. The courthouse steps felt like walking up to my own execution. 2 weeks after Renee helped me understand what my husband was really doing, we filed the papers. A petition for emergency asset protection. Legal language that basically said, freeze everything until we figure out who owns what. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely sign my name. He's going to know something's up the moment he gets served, I told Renee as we walked down the courthouse steps. Good, she said. Let him sweat. I went home and made dinner like it was any other Tuesday. Meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Emma's favorite. My husband came home at his usual time, kissed my cheek with those same lying lips, asked about my day like he actually cared. Fine, I said, setting his plate in front of him. Yours. Long meeting with the lawyers about some property stuff. Boring business things. I almost choked on my water. He was still working on erasing me, even now. Even while I was fighting back. The next morning, everything changed. I was loading the dishwasher when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a man in a cheap suit holding an envelope. Process server. My husband answered the door in his bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, probably expecting a package or neighbor with a complaint. Instead, he got handed legal papers that would blow up his whole plan. I watched from the kitchen as he read the first page. Then the second. His face went white. Then red. Then white again. What is it, honey? I called out, the picture of innocent concern. He didn't answer. Just stood there in the doorway, holding those papers like they were radioactive. When he finally came into the kitchen, he was a different man. The smooth, confident husband who never worried about anything was gone. In his place was someone who looked scared. Actually scared. We need to talk, he said, his voice tight. About what? He held up the papers. You know about what? For a moment, I considered keeping up the act. Playing dumb. Letting him think this was some mistake, some bureaucratic mix-up that would go away with the right phone calls. But looking at him standing there, finally caught, finally scared, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Yes, I said simply. I know. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma was upstairs getting ready for school, humming some song from her latest Disney movie, completely unaware that her parents' marriage was ending in the kitchen below. "How long?" he asked. "Long enough." "The bank accounts are frozen," he said, like I didn't already know. "I can't access anything. The mortgage payment, the car loans, Emma's school fees. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to steal from your own family." He flinched like I'd slapped him. "I wasn't stealing. I was protecting our assets. By moving them to Rebecca." Another flinch. Deeper this time. "How do you—" He stopped, realizing the question answered itself. If I knew about the money, I knew about everything. "Daddy." Emma's voice came from the stairs. "Is everything okay?" We both turned to see our daughter standing in the doorway, backpack on her shoulders, lunchbox in her hand, looking between us with the kind of worry that 9-year-olds shouldn't have to carry. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," my husband said, but his voice cracked on the words. "Why do you both look upset?" "Just grown-up stuff," I said, forcing a smile. "Nothing for you to worry about." But as I drove Emma to school that morning, I could see her watching me in the rearview mirror. Kids know when their world is falling apart, even when you try to hide it. When I got back home, my husband was on the phone with his lawyer, pacing around his office like a caged animal. I could hear pieces of the conversation through the door. "What do you mean I can't touch it? It's my money too." "No, I didn't tell her. How was I supposed to know she'd file first?" That afternoon, he tried a different approach. The charm offensive. "Look," he said, finding me folding laundry in our bedroom, "maybe we got off track somewhere. Maybe we both made mistakes. But we can fix this. We can work it out." "Can we?" I asked, not looking up from Emma's school shirts. "Of course. We're family. We love each other." "Do we?" He sat down on the bed beside me, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. The same cologne he wore when he went to see Rebecca. "I love you," he said, and for just a moment, he almost sounded like he meant it. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. At the man I'd married 15 years ago, the father of my child, the person I'd trusted with my whole life. "Then why did you try to erase me?" He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I saw something in his eyes that I'd been waiting to see. Fear. Would you have the courage to fight back legally when everything was on the line? Comment yes or no, because what happened next would test every ounce of strength I had left. The community gala was supposed to be his night to shine. Every year, the Riverside Country Club hosted their annual charity auction, and every year, my husband was front and center. The successful businessman with the perfect family and the generous heart. This year, he was supposed to be honored as a major sponsor, his name printed in gold on the program cover. I stood at the back of the ballroom in a black dress I'd bought 3 years ago, watching him work the room like nothing had changed. Like our marriage wasn't falling apart. Like his assets weren't frozen and his lawyers weren't scrambling to undo the legal mess he'd created. But I could see the cracks. The way his smile was just a little too tight. The way his laugh was just a little too loud. The way he kept glancing toward the exit like he wanted to run. "He looks nervous," Renee whispered beside me. She'd offered to come for moral support, and I was grateful for the company. Good. The auction was in full swing. Art pieces and vacation packages and weekend getaways, all going for ridiculous amounts of money to people who had more than they knew what to do with. My husband bid on a few items, but his heart wasn't in it. He kept checking his phone, his face getting darker with each message. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer announced, "we'd like to take a moment to recognize our major sponsors, the generous donors who make events like this possible. The lights dimmed. A slideshow began on the big screen behind the podium. Pictures of happy families and grateful charity recipients and smiling volunteers. The kind of feel-good montage that made rich people feel better about being rich. But something was wrong. My husband's picture wasn't there. His name wasn't called. When the slideshow ended and the lights came back up, he was standing in the middle of the room looking confused and embarrassed. "I think there's been a mistake," he said to the woman running the auction, his voice just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "No mistake, Mr. Davidson," she replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "We received notice that your sponsorship was withdrawn." "Withdrawn? By who?" She glanced toward the back of the room, toward me, and I felt a moment of panic. But then I realized she wasn't looking at me. She was looking past me, toward the exit, where a man in an expensive suit was shaking his head slightly. His lawyer. The frozen assets had consequences I hadn't even thought of. The charitable donations, the country club dues, the social obligations that came with his lifestyle. All of it required money he could no longer access. I watched my husband realize this in real time. Watched his face go from confusion to understanding to something that looked almost like grief. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about everything. His reputation, his social standing, his entire identity as the successful businessman everyone admired. People were starting to stare. Whisper. Point. He found me in the crowd, his eyes locking onto mine across the room. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. Two people who used to love each other, now standing on opposite sides of a war neither of us had wanted to fight. Then he walked over. "Satisfied?" he asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the auction continuing behind him. "Not even close. This won't bring us back together, you know." "I don't want us back together. I want what's mine." He nodded slowly, like he was finally beginning to understand the game we were playing. "The house, the accounts, Emma's college fund," I continued. "My name goes back on everything, or this gets a lot worse for you." "And if I agree? Then maybe you get to keep some dignity." He was quiet for a long moment, watching the auction continue without him. His friends and business associates were still bidding, still laughing, still living their lives like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. His world was smaller now. Colder. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said finally. "But you did. I know. You tried to erase me. I know. While I was taking care of Emma and managing our home and worrying about your happiness, you were planning to throw me away like garbage." "I know," he said again, and this time his voice broke just a little. For just a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. This man, who had been so confident, so sure of his plan, was finally seeing the consequences of his choices. But then I remembered the will. The bank transfers. Rebecca's name where mine should have been. "It's too late for sorry," I said. He nodded again and walked away, leaving the gala early, his head down, his shoulders curved like an old man's. I stayed until the end, watching the auction conclude, watching people write checks and make promises to help others. It felt fitting somehow. Justice being served at a charity event. Do you think some people get exactly what they deserve? Share your thoughts in the comments, because the final confrontation was still coming, and it would change everything between us forever. The knock on my door came at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. I was making pancakes for Emma, flour on my hands, hair still messy from sleep, when I heard it. Not the doorbell. An actual knock. Sharp and urgent. Through the peephole, I could see my husband standing on our front porch. But he looked different. Smaller somehow. Like something inside him had collapsed. "We need to talk," he said when I opened the door. "Emma's here. Please." There was something in his voice I hadn't heard in years. Desperation. Real desperation. I let him in, and we sat at the kitchen table while Emma watched cartoons in the living room. The same table where we'd eaten thousands of meals together. Where we'd planned vacations and discussed Emma's school and argued about money back when we were still trying to make our marriage work. The lawyers say I don't have a choice, he said without preamble. About what? Everything. The accounts, the house, the will. They say you have grounds for fraud charges if I don't cooperate. I poured myself coffee but didn't offer him any. Do you want to find out if they're right? He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands folded on the table. Hands that used to touch me with love. Hands that had signed papers to erase me. I met Rebecca at a conference last year, he said finally. She was smart and funny and she made me feel young again. Like the person I used to be before mortgages and parent-teacher conferences and all the stuff that makes you feel old. I don't want to hear about Rebecca. I thought I could have both, he continued like I hadn't spoken. Keep my family and have this other thing too. I thought I was smart enough to manage it all. By stealing from me? I wasn't trying to steal. I was trying to prepare. In case you found out and wanted a divorce. I thought if I protected some assets, we could split things fairly and everyone would be okay. Fairly. The word came out louder than I intended. You were giving my life to another woman. I know how it looks. It doesn't just look like betrayal. It is betrayal. Emma appeared in the doorway, drawn by our raised voices. Why are you guys fighting again? The silence that followed was deafening. My husband and I both stared at our daughter, this innocent person we'd created together, who was now caught in the middle of our destruction. Daddy and I are just talking about some grown-up stuff, I said finally. Are you getting divorced? The question hung in the air like smoke. Emma was 9, but she wasn't stupid. She'd seen the tension, heard the whispered phone calls, felt the change in our house. My husband looked at me, then at Emma, then back at me. Yeah, sweetheart, he said quietly. We probably are. Emma nodded like she'd been expecting this answer. Will I still live here? Yes, I said immediately. This is your home. That won't change. Will I still see Daddy? Of course, he said, his voice thick. I'll always be your dad. That never changes, no matter what. She seemed to consider this. Okay. Can I go back to my cartoons now? Of course, baby. After she left, we sat in silence again. But it was a different kind of silence. Not the angry, bitter quiet of the past few weeks, but something sadder. The silence of two people who used to love each other, acknowledging that love wasn't enough. I'll sign everything, he said finally. The asset transfers, the new will, whatever you need. I'll make sure you and Emma are taken care of. What about Rebecca? He shrugged. What about her? She was never the point. She was just an escape. From responsibility. From growing up. From being the person I was supposed to be. And now? Now I have to figure out who I actually am when I'm not running away from my life. Over the next 2 weeks, the lawyers worked out the details. The house stayed in my name. The accounts were restored. My name went back on everything he'd tried to erase me from. It wasn't victory exactly. It was justice. Quiet, legal, permanent justice. The divorce papers were signed on a Tuesday morning in a sterile conference room that smelled like old coffee and disappointment. My husband looked older than his 45 years, worn down by the consequences of his choices. I'm sorry, he said as we left the lawyer's office. For all of it. I hope someday you can forgive me. I thought about that. About forgiveness and second chances and whether people really change or just get better at hiding who they are. I hope someday I want to, I said. Do you think cheaters deserve forgiveness, or do some betrayals go too deep to heal? Be honest in the comments, because this story is almost over, but the real lesson is just beginning. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my kitchen, the same kitchen where this all began, and everything is different. The morning light streams through windows I paid to have cleaned. The coffee I'm drinking was bought with money from an account that has only my name on it. The newspaper spread across the table shows a story about a local businessman who lost his country club membership and several major clients after some unspecified personal difficulties. My husband. Ex-husband now. Emma is upstairs getting ready for school, humming some song I don't recognize. She's doing better than I expected. Kids are resilient in ways that constantly amaze me. She sees her father every other weekend, and he's actually trying to be present with her now. Like losing everything else made him realize what really mattered. I don't hate him anymore. That's the strangest part. The anger that burned so hot for so many months just faded. Replaced by something calmer but no less powerful. Self-respect, maybe. Or just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I fought back. Last week, I ran into Rebecca at the grocery store. She was in the frozen food section, looking tired and older than she had from a distance. When she saw me, she froze like she'd been caught stealing. I'm sorry, she said after a long, awkward moment. About everything. I didn't know he was married when we met. I believed her. My husband was good at lies, good at making people believe what he wanted them to believe. What happened to you two? I asked. It ended when the money stopped, she said with a bitter laugh. Turns out I was more interested in the lifestyle than the man. We stood there for a moment, two women who'd been used by the same selfish person, sharing a moment of understanding in the ice cream aisle. He tried to erase you, didn't he? She said finally. Yes. I'm glad you didn't let him. The house is quieter now. Smaller somehow without his presence, but also more peaceful. Emma and I have our routines. Pancakes on Saturday mornings. Movie nights on Fridays. Homework at the kitchen table after school. I've started working again, something I hadn't done since Emma was born. Just part-time bookkeeping for small businesses, but it feels good to use my brain for something other than managing a household. To have my own money, my own purpose, my own identity separate from being someone's wife. Renee and I have become real friends. She still lives next door, and we have coffee most mornings after the kids leave for school. She's the one who pushed me to tell this story, to share what I learned about fighting back when someone tries to erase you. Other women need to hear this, she said. They need to know they don't have to disappear just because someone wants them to. So here I am, telling you about the night I found 3 condoms in my husband's office and decided to fight fire with fire. About the pepper that started it all and the paper trail that finished it. But mostly I'm telling you about something more important than revenge. I'm telling you about refusing to be erased. Because here's what I learned in those terrible, transformative months. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most will try to make you disappear. They'll do it quietly, legally, systematically. They'll steal your money and your security and your future, and they'll do it with a smile on their face and lies on their lips. But here's what else I learned: you don't have to let them. You don't have to scream or fight or make a scene. You don't have to pepper their condoms or slash their tires or any of the dramatic things you see in movies. You just have to refuse to disappear. You document everything. You build your case. You find your allies. You use their own greed and carelessness against them. You fight quiet and smart and patient. And you never, ever give up on yourself. My name is on everything now. The house, the accounts, the life I helped build. But more than that, My daughter sees me as someone who fought for what was mine. Someone who refused to be thrown away. Someone who turned a moment of betrayal into a lesson about strength. That's the legacy I'm leaving her. Not money or property or things that can be taken away. I'm leaving her the knowledge that no one can erase a woman who refuses to erase herself. The pepper was just the beginning. The real revenge was refusing to disappear. If this story touched you, if it made you think about your own strength or reminded you that quiet women can be the most dangerous of all, please hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications because I have more stories about women who refuse to give up, stories that will inspire you and maybe change how you see your own power. Most importantly, tell me in the comments, have you ever had to fight for what was yours? Have you ever refused to disappear when someone wanted you to? Share your story because other women need to hear it. We're stronger when we stand together. Until next time, remember, they can try to erase you, but only you decide whether you disappear.